Уважаеми гости, ако обичате да вземем местата си. Dear guests, please, we are ready to start. As if you want to take, I'll speak in Bulgarian, but if you want to take, okay. I don't know where is English. Number 3. Уважаеми колеги, скъпи приятели,
dear friends,
имам удоволствие
I have the pleasure
да започна да представя
of
за начало на нашия втори ден на шестия
introducing our first speaker for the second day of the sixth Congress, a world-renowned journalist, traveler, writer, and philosopher. 7 or 8 years ago, I took this book for the first time. I took it, I fell in love with it, and it sits on my bedside table now constantly, and I would open a random page every now and then and get immersed in its wonderful contents. Because what Eric does is he studies human happiness, but through the prism of states, continents, the way of living, the societies, their history, their national mentality, probably their past, and mostly their future. Then I realized that I wasn't the only Bulgarian who was in love with Eric Weiner. He has a very serious background. He was a journalist with New York Times, and this is where his books started. His books are now triumphantly going around the world, translated in 25 languages. These are followed by Man Looking for God, Geography of the Genius. All these are books where Eric studies people and human nature. I know that in my country, Bulgaria, there are scores of fan clubs of Eric Weiner. I'm very happy that he agreed to visit Bulgaria for the first time. I know that he has visited over 100 countries globally, and it is my great pleasure to be able to welcome him to Bulgaria. He will be given a title, Doctor Honoris Causa, in one of our leading universities. He will meet people, he will sign books, and he will enjoy the love of his Bulgarian fans, I hope. Currently, his fans globally are looking forward to his new book entitled The Geography of Wisdom. And it is namely about wisdom that we will try to speak today. And this is why we have invited him to speak to us. I hope we will all enjoy his intervention. A warm welcome to you, Eric, in Bulgaria. Welcome to the 6th International Congress.
Thank you. Thank you, Maxi, for that very excellent, gracious introduction. And I am honored to be on your bedside table. That is truly a place of honor for any author, because those are the books that people really read, the ones next to their bed. So, ladies and gentlemen, fellow journalists and news executives, thank you for inviting me to this year's World Congress to give the keynote talk. So, since I received the invitation, I've been thinking a lot about what I could say that hasn't already been said about the state of journalism and of the world. You already know that both face daunting, seemingly insurmountable challenges: a broken business model, a distracted readership, and a world where people shout at one another but rarely talk to one another let alone listen. Well, I'm here to deliver some good news. Things are not as bad as they seem. The future of journalism, I believe, is extremely bright. But I want to take a step back here from the daily grind of putting out the reports that you do and take a look at the big picture and look at two ideas that you may not think about on a daily basis as you struggle to keep up with the flood of news events. Place and, as Maxie said, wisdom. I am a place person. I always have been. I believe in the power of place and of travel, and I've believed this ever since, as a young 5-year-old, I ran away from home. True story. You see, I was looking for something. I'm not sure what it was, but I was looking for it. I've always believed that happiness lies just around the corner. The question is, which corner? Now, this being the digital age, you might question this assumption that place matters. You might think that place no longer matters, that geography is dead. Thanks to Skype and FaceTime and other technologies, it doesn't matter where we are, right? We can be anywhere and still connect. Not really. This isn't true. As we make more digital contacts, we crave more actual physical contact. Travel, in fact, in the digital age is growing, not shrinking. The more we talk on Skype, the more we want to talk in person. See, this is why we've all gathered here in Sofia in person and not in one giant conference call. We crave in-person contact, and we always will. And besides, have you noticed that the people who tell us otherwise, who claim to be building a future without a place, they all tend to live in one place, a 60-mile stretch of land in California, best known as Silicon Valley. Most investment in high tech still flows through that one place. Why? Because place matters. Consider this study conducted in Finland. Researchers there eavesdropped on people's mobile phone conversations. It's actually incredibly easy to do. You just need to be in public anytime, day or night, and you too can eavesdrop on someone's mobile phone conversation. Well, what was the number one question that person on the phone was asking the person on the other end? Can you hear me now was the number one question. But a close second was, where are you? Where are you? Place matters. Place shapes our lives in ways we're not always aware of. Simply put, who we are, rather where we are, affects who we are. Where we are affects who we are. But what do I mean by place? Well, yeah, I mean topography, mountains, seaside, that sort of thing. But mostly when I talk about place, I mean culture. Culture is the sea that we swim in, but it's mostly an invisible sea. We're like goldfish swimming in a bowl. The goldfish doesn't know it's in a bowl until you remove it, and then it's, oh, I was in a fish bowl. See, often when we say, that's just the way things are, what we really mean is, that's just the way things are here. Place matters. And place and wisdom are closely connected. The Apache Indians of North America have a saying, wisdom sits in places. Wisdom sits in places. This is true and profound, I think. Consider the appearance of geniuses, people like Leonardo da Vinci and Mozart and Einstein. If you were to map the appearance of geniuses across time and space, what do you find? You do not find geniuses appearing randomly, one in Bolivia, one in Canada, 3 in Bulgaria. No, you find what I call genius clusters. Athens in 400 BC, Florence in the year 1500, Vienna in 1900, Silicon Valley perhaps today. Certain places at certain times produce a surplus of brilliant minds and good ideas. Why? It is place, I believe, and more specifically culture. Something was, as we say, in the water. And the question I investigate in my book, The Geography of Genius, is what exactly? And can we bottle it? And can I market it? No. Can we bottle it? I don't have time here to discuss everything I found, but there are certain elements that these places have in common. Freedom, for instance, the freedom to discuss ideas openly. An abundance of what is known as third places. These are neutral places where people can meet, like coffee shops of 1900 Vienna, where people of different walks of life come together. And also a sense of possibility. There's also something that I call the creativity contagion. And this has been shown in many studies. Surround yourself with creative people, and chances are you too will be more creative. This bleeds over from one field to another. Now, you may not be an artist or a musician, but having an artist or a musician as a friend might very well make you a better, more creative software engineer or journalist. Place matters, and wisdom matters too. It matters today, even in the digital age, especially in the digital age. You see, I think we're confused. We confuse data and information and knowledge, knowledge and wisdom. It is wisdom that people crave, now more than ever. What is wisdom? And that's certainly a good question to ask here in a city, Sofia, that means wisdom. Wisdom, I think, is knowledge put to practical use and for a common good. The device in your pocket right now, or perhaps you're clutching it in your hand or typing away in it right now, the smartphone, enables you to access all of human knowledge, from the ancient Egyptians to yesterday's football scores. Yet it has not diminished our hunger for wisdom. If anything, it has increased it. All of this information, all of this knowledge, and yet we are no wiser. Now you might say, what does this have to do with journalism, right? We're in the information business. No, you're not. You are in the wisdom business, even if you don't know it. In fact, I would go as far as to say that journalism, if it is to survive, must plant itself firmly in the wisdom business. And if you can't say that in Sofia, again, where can you? In the old days, it may have been enough to report just the facts and leave it up to the reader to sort them out. I don't think that's true anymore. The reader or the viewer or listener is overwhelmed by the information we're feeding them. A recent survey in the US found that people struggle to navigate this ocean of information. 58% say staying well informed is difficult, while only 38% believe it's easy. Now, you may throw up your arms and say, what can we do about it? We're journalists. We convey information, and there's a heck of a lot more of it these days to convey. This is true, but also an unnecessarily defeatist attitude. There's much you can do to be better journalists in the information age. And I want to give you 8 of them quickly here, but to demonstrate what I mean by place matters, I'm going to change my place, so bear with me. Can you hear me? Yes? So it's important to move as journalists. So I'm going to change my place from sitting in that chair as if I were Kofi Annan at the United Nations to talking to you like this. And maybe your perspective has changed a little bit. Well, you can see me now, and you can see that I'm perhaps better looking than I was sitting down. That is usually true. And I've changed my perspective. I can see everyone more clearly, and this feels a little less United Nations-y, a little more American talk show, perhaps. Place matters, wisdom matters. This is offered humbly as someone who now writes books and doesn't have the pressures of the daily journalism demands that you have. So I realize I'm saying these 8 suggestions from a place of luxury. So let's take a look at 8 ways you can be better, wiser journalists. Number 1, slow down. Let me say that again. Slow down. I realize that speed is sometimes important, and scooping your competition is important. But sometimes slower and more thoughtful is better, because with speed comes errors, of course, and also regret. Better to be right than to be first. And I realize this isn't always easy in the digital age. It has accelerated every aspect of our lives, the way we communicate, negotiate, navigate, everything. This is precisely why I think journalists, even those working for fast-paced news agencies, need to occasionally slow down. Take the time to dig deeper and wider, too, to put a story in perspective, for instance. This age demands that journalists not only be fast, but they also fact-check information, weigh information, curate information, and you can only do that if you take your time and slow down. Number two, be a Renaissance man or woman. This is something I learned in my book, The Geography of Genius. I learned that every genius, everyone, without exception, has been interdisciplinary. Now, the best example is, of course, Leonardo da Vinci, who was a painter, of course, an aeronautical engineer, a military strategist, and much more. Einstein was well-read, and not only in the sciences. He also played the violin. Likewise, a good journalist, I believe, is a well-rounded human being with a wide range of interests. And a good newsroom is one where journalists with different expertise speak to one another, and where the line between one beat and another is fluid and blurred. Number three, and this one may sound a little bit odd, but bear with me, think like a philosopher. Now, for the past few years, I've been working on my new book, The Socrates Express, or The Geography of Wisdom, and it's really about practical philosophy. And I realize that may sound like a contradiction to many of you. Philosophy isn't practical, it's the least practical thing you can do. Well, that wasn't always the case. Down the road here in Athens, a couple thousand years ago, philosophy was extremely practical. And philosophy, of course, means the love of wisdom, philosophia. And journalists, I believe, are also lovers of wisdom. The first journalist, did you know, was Socrates. I know, Google Socrates and they'll say he was a philosopher, but really he was a journalist. What did Socrates do? He went around town asking people a lot of annoying questions that they didn't want to answer, just like a journalist. What is beauty? What is truth? Socrates was also a sloppy dresser and had very little money, by the way, just like a journalist. He also got into trouble with the authorities and was imprisoned and sadly executed, sadly like some journalists today. But seriously, what can journalists learn from someone like Socrates? I would say it is to question assumptions. Question assumptions. That's what Socrates did. He wondered whether people, especially people in power, really knew what they were talking about. Politicians talked a lot about democracy, but could they even define democracy? Generals talked a lot about courage, but did they know what courage meant? If you can't define your terms, you can't have a healthy debate, and I think that is the role of the journalist. Number four, be global. Now, it's a cliche, I realize, to say we are live in an interconnected world, but it also happens to be true. This is why I think travel is so important. As I like to say, our destination is never a place, but a new way of looking at things. What do I mean by that? Think of a pair of eyeglasses. A pair of glasses you've been wearing all your life, and you think you have a good prescription, but in fact you don't. And you don't know your prescription's off, you just think that's the way the world looks. Now imagine someone removes your glasses, gives you a new prescription, and you're like, aha, this is a new way of looking at things. That's the value of travel, and what I mean when I speak of it. So the world is interconnected, yes, but that doesn't mean it's homogenized. We're not all the same, and thank God for that. Google can help you navigate a foreign city. It can even help you translate a few simple words and phrases. It cannot help you understand a foreign culture, not even one little bit. A word about a word. That word is foreign. Now, I realize the word foreign has fallen out of favor, in newsrooms especially. We used to have foreign desks. Now we have international desks. We used to have foreign correspondents. Now we have international correspondents. And I realize why we say that, but I think it's also a mistake. There's no such thing as the view from nowhere. Each of us has a perspective. If you are, say, a Bulgarian journalist posted to Berlin, you are a foreign correspondent in a foreign country. These are facts, and we do ourselves and our audience a disservice if we pretend otherwise. Now, this is important. When I approach my work, I approach it from the perspective of someone who grew up in Baltimore in the United States, who is traveling the world. And some things, be it in Qatar or India or Pakistan or Indonesia, look really strange to me. And I tell my readers, hey, this is really strange, because it would be dishonest to say otherwise. But I don't stop there, and I probe, and I say, but what do they get out of it? Why do the Japanese slurp their noodles so loudly? Why do Indians drive the way they do? You know, what do they get out of it? And there's always something. People may behave strangely, but they don't behave randomly and in a meaningless way. There's always a reason. Number 6, be local. We had an American politician named Tip O'Neill who famously said, all politics is local. Well, all journalism is local too. So go out there and look for the local angle to a global story. How is the trade war between US and China, for instance, affecting a farmer in Bulgaria? Number 7, talk to people. Oh, that sounds old-fashioned, I know. When I was a young reporter back in the day, I spoke with my sources on the phone, or better yet, in person. Now today, of course, we have email and WhatsApp and chatting and all these ways of staying in touch with our sources, and it's efficient in a way, but not really, because something is lost through a lack of either verbal or face-to-face contact. As you know, I'm standing here before you, you can read my body language, you can listen to my tone of voice, so I would urge everyone to go out there and talk to people. Number 8, and this is perhaps the most unusual of all, be positive. I want to tell you a story of how my first book, The Geography of Bliss, came about. I was working as a foreign correspondent for National Public Radio, and I had a wonderful job. I was based in New Delhi, in Jerusalem, in Tokyo, and I was traveling the world and telling stories, but it occurred to me that I was telling mostly unhappy stories, whether it's a conflict in Kashmir or an economic crisis in Jakarta, whatever it was. And I realized that that was the role of journalists. And of course, these are important stories to tell. But as someone prone to a kind of melancholy anyway, I realized it was dragging me down personally. And I woke up one day in Iraq or someplace, and I had an epiphany. I thought, what if I traveled the world for a year, and instead of looking for the least happy places, the sad stories, I looked for the happiest places, the happiest stories. And then I had a second epiphany. What if I got NPR to pay me to travel the world for a year looking for these happy places and these happy stories? Well, our foreign editor said, no. I don't think so, Eric. That's not what we do. We're in the news business. And eventually I found a publisher who did support my idea. But I want to challenge you with this. Why not? Why is not something that journalists do? Why isn't there a happiness beat or a genius beat or a wisdom beat? Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you be good news only agencies and only report the good news. That's absurd, of course. What I'm suggesting is that you widen your perspective and view your task to be not only conveyors of bad news, but good news too. As I speak these words, there are people out there around the world developing innovative solutions to universal problems. Those stories are news too, and I would encourage you to go out there and tell them. Thank you very much for your time.
Аз не съм говорил предварително с Ерик Weiner, но мисля, че няма да е лошо, ако някой има въпроси на всичко това, което чухме, да използваме неговото присъствие. Така че имате думата, уважаеми колеги, за въпроси, за мнения, за несъгласие и за каквото и да е друго. Ако обичате.
Hello. So my name is Fausto Triana. I'm from Prensa Latina News Agency, Cuban. It's very interesting, everything that you mentioned before. But I would like to pay attention to here. Okay. You mentioned the respect, cultural respect of the countries, in terms that sometimes that when we write about any countries, this curious thing that happen in and cultural issues. So the objectivity sometimes is not very accurate because those countries have cultural characteristic are different with the Western or Eastern countries. So when we talk about this point, sometimes there is not an equivalence between what happened, what's going on in one of this country and in our country. I put some example, the case of the hurricanes. Sometimes, and it did happen in 2017, that's something that I will point out as example. With the Hurricane Irma, it touched some Caribbean countries, including Cuba, very strongly. But according to CNN and Fox News, the only thing that happened of this hurricane was the touching United States territories. So what's going on with the Caribbean countries? So we were only a tourist postcard and anything else happened. So that's something that with the thing that you mentioned of philosophy being positive, but it's also being accurate and objectivity of what happened and what's going on in every country. And I don't think that the hurricane touched any country like terrorist attack. Is you cannot say it's more important that happened in this country or in another country. The problem is that people suffer the same thing. Recently it happened some terrorist attack in Sri Lanka, and it was, I don't remember exactly the figures, but it was more than 200 people died there. So there is a terrorist attack in Sri Lanka, and there is a terrorist attack in Paris, that is a city that I love too much. But it's, in Paris died 5 people, and Sri Lanka died 200 people. It's not the same thing. So the interpretation of people, the readers, is very complicated because sometimes they say, well, my country doesn't mean anything for the world, and the other countries, yes. And that's something that I would like if you can elaborate about this. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, a very good question. A couple of comments. One, you talked about objectivity, and I realize that's a word used a lot in journalism. I actually think objectivity is not possible, but fairness is. We can't be fully objective because we have certain backgrounds. You come from Cuba, I come from the US. We bring certain perspectives. That means we can't be fully objective, nor should we be, but we can be fair, and I think that's an important distinction. With regard to the Hurricane Irma and the difference in coverage between a terrorist attack in Paris and in Sri Lanka, very good point. We still see, I guess I'll call it tribalism in this world, that we care more about our tribe than the tribe next door. We care about our country more than other countries. And, you know, all news being local, people living in Havana are going to care more about economic problems in Cuba than in China. But the world is connected, and it is, I think, the job of journalists, as I said, to be fully formed human beings, and that means putting yourself in the shoes of a Cuban or a Sri Lankan, and not just an American or a Frenchman, that you see the other person as fully human, and when a mother loses a child in a terrorist attack, it really doesn't matter whether that mother was French or Sri Lankan. And that's something I think journalists have to constantly work on, is being universalists. Thank you for your question. Other questions? I'd be happy to answer any. or observations or criticisms? No, no criticisms. It's a joke. Okay. That means there are no criticisms. Thank you for your time. I hope to meet everyone at the dinners and events, and happy to chat with you more informally.
Благодаря, Eric. Thank you very much. And we start next session. Clive, who is the next panel? Please. Okay.